Tiago, you were telling us off the record about a project where you've seen quite late, quite unbankable sovereign guarantee. So on a no-name basis, maybe you can share a few of the stories.
Thanks, Roma. So my name is Tiago Almeida. I'm with the Rand Merchant Bank in the infrastructure finance team and been involved in sub-Saharan Africa transactions. So I have some experience in REAP. I will not bore all of you with that. So as Roman suggested, I think most of the key points have been covered. So I'll probably focus on some interesting examples that I've experienced and maybe lessons learned for all of us. So I guess speaking on the point already mentioned around involve your bankers early on, I think that's really fundamental. And again, because we had a situation, for example, where the sponsor, a very important sponsor, actually very plugged into that particular country, which had some of the most important documents for us already signed, and one of them being the guarantee that the government need to provide to the lenders for any sort of early termination event. And basically, when we started to look at that project, and we had a 2-page guarantee from government. And obviously, when we started to look at that, there was so many gaps and holes in that document that for more than a year, I think, we actually just been sort of discussing with the lenders' advisors and the sponsors' advisors on how to amend the guarantee. So that was one of the problems. And then the second problem was actually to convince the government to accept our changes. Because as you can imagine, you can't just go to government or parliament and just, please, now you're going to sign another one to replace the previous one. So please, I think, the lesson there was really have your advisors or your bankers engage early on in the process, particularly when it's more customized sort of projects, which you see in sub-Saharan Africa more than, for example, in South Africa, where there's a lot of templates for most of the documents. So that is actually fundamental. Then the other thing that I think is quite important, and again, building on a sort of an interesting example that we faced, is I think in some governments in Africa, just again, try to build a partnership relationship with your utility or the government on the other side, because sometimes, and it happened in one situation, you have government signing something which probably they actually didn't quite understand what they were signing up to. So that created an expectation from the sponsors and lenders that, we are protected if X, Y, and Z happens. Well, imagine what? There was a problem, and it was because a situation where the government, one of the government stakeholders had a specific obligation to deliver a piece of equipment to that particular project, but guess what? They actually didn't realize it, or they just came to their radar very, very late in the process. So that ended up having a project which basically was, almost completed, but could not operate. And I think that the lesson learned there was that clearly, there was some naivety from the part of the sponsors saying, well, no, we are protected because contractually there's early payments and, deemed availabilities and all of that. But interestingly, it was, quite obvious to most of the people in the room that it will be actually, somewhat a problem for that particular utility to come up with those payments where no electrons were being available. So again, just make sure that, the contracts are the contracts. What's in the contract is meant to be complied with, but from an expectations point of view and understanding of actual arrangement, just make sure that you as sponsors and the government on the other side are actually aligned in that regard. Because again, that can lead to, which in this case is sort of the case, a restructuring of the whole project effectively. So that's equity risk fundamentally that is being taken, and protect yourselves against those situations. Then I think I think most of the key points for me again have been mentioned. There's not a lack of liquidity for good projects. I think we banks we're really looking around us probably as hard as you to find good bankable projects. So there is money out there. The issue really is to make sure that those projects are bankable. And then risk allocation issues. Your typical force majeures, etc., government support, make sure that, if there is a collapse of the structure, the lenders are protected through government compensations and then backed by MEGAs or etc., whatever it's required, and making sure that all of that is perfectly understood by all the stakeholders. Without that, there's no project. Without a good PPA, there's no project. There's no point in spending time on anything else. Then just a general advice, I think, from a lender's perspective, we often see sometimes some of our clients or sponsors, looking at us more sort of on an arm's length basis, and that really should not be the case. I think someone already mentioned here, we all need to be proud of the project at the end of the day. So really try to build a partner relationship with your bank, with your bankers. I don't think we should focus too much on margin. If the margin is 450 or 455, at the end of the day, I think it's the probability of getting to financial close, and also as sponsors and developers, your equity return. So even if the margin from that particular tranche may look high, maybe that bank has other solutions from a structuring point of view, other type of debt facilities that can actually then improve your returns. So focus rather on that than debating the margin. I will leave it at that.
Tiago, I think you mentioned something which is very close to my heart in that sense. I think it's a partnership between the public sectors and the private sectors. And it's very important both sides at the table perfectly understand what they're committing to.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.